So this talk is about tailoring crowdsourcing projects to fit both the institution and the crowd. And it's projects where the State Library has been able to harness the enthusiasm and the passions of volunteers for some of our specific collections. So I'm just going to give you a bit of context at the beginning about the State Library's digitisation program. We're sort of halfway through a 10-year project to digitise some of our most significant collections. It's a program that's been supported by the New South Wales Government, and at the end of the last financial year, 16-17, some 9 million images or page views have been created. So substantially increasing the global access of the library's collections. Amongst the material being digitised is our very fragile heritage items, including original manuscripts, maps and plans, photographic and glass plate negatives, and also magnetic tapes for sound recordings. There's a number of post-digitisation projects underway to make these collections discoverable and reusable. And crowdsourcing projects are just one of the many that the library is undertaking to improve access to its heritage collections. Our crowdsourcing goals are discoverability, collaboration and sharing, and these are aligned to the library's core priorities to collect, connect and community. So today I'm going to talk about a couple of crowdsourcing projects that the State Library of New South Wales has been doing since 2013. These have been the transcribing of manuscript collections and oral history collections and geo-referencing. So much of the recent literature around GLAM crowdsourcing projects is focused now on collaboration and mutual benefits that arise between the community of volunteers and the institution. And I wanted to acknowledge particularly the work that's been produced and edited by myriad, the book Crowdsourcing Our Cultural Heritage, because a lot of these trends have come out of that work. Certainly the outcomes for our projects in New South Wales have proved to be mutually beneficial to both parties, the library and the crowd, in that our volunteers have had the opportunity to engage deeply with the collections, and then the library has been able to enhance collection records with additional metadata. So through these projects, the library has built ongoing relationships with volunteers. We've certainly gained a better understanding of their interests, their habits, and their motivations for supporting the library. Of course, the model for this volunteer participation goes well back before this sort of digital revolution. We had volunteers transcribing some of our most significant heritage collections, our manuscript collections, back in the early 2000s, as these sort of significant works were being very selectively digitised. So our Sir Joseph Banks Endeavour Journal, our First Fleet journals and Early Explorers journals were being transcribed by volunteers before this mass digitisation funding. This was very old school of library volunteers coming into the library and typing up Word documents that were then converted into HTML and then linked to the catalogue record, where the digitised album of images could be accessed and along with the transcription all through the catalogue record. However, it was around 2007 the library began a project to digitise its First World War diary collection. This is a really significant collection of personal diaries and correspondence that the library basically purchased directly after World War I. We began scoping the size of the collection, surveying significance and planning the digitisation of the diary volumes, really looking towards 2014 and the centenary of the First World War. So library volunteers began transcribing these World War I diaries at the time. However, we realised even though the volunteers were incredibly passionate and dedicated to coming in and transcribing, we weren't going to be able to transcribe nearly all of them in time for the centenary. And so our staff and our web team built a transcription tool. It was developed in-house in the Drupal content management system. It was developed initially as a prototype to improve the transcription process. And we also wanted to look at exploring new opportunities for crowdsourcing that would expand the workforce from just the on-site library volunteers only. We looked at a number of tools that were available online in other institutions. We looked particularly at the US National Archives for their Citizen Archivist dashboard, and we adapted some of the features that they had in their tool, particularly looking at sort of the status of each transcription, i.e. not yet started, partially transcribed and completed. The library's transcription tool began to be developed in 2013, and the interface was very simple. There was basically a digitised page on one side of the screen and then a plain text data entry box on the right, and volunteers would type their transcript into that box. There was a process of QA, whereas when there was a second level of checking by an experienced library volunteer who checked all of the work and then marked that as complete and ready to be accessed by end users. We did receive feedback from long-term volunteers who were keen to use the new tool, but they wanted to stick with one person's own set of diaries. They obviously bond when you're reading a World War I diary and say there's 5 volumes in the collection that trace that person's experience from the beginning of the war through to the end or their end of the war. They wanted to do that whole person's set of diaries. So we had to then build in an ability to lock down a set of diaries so that one person could actually follow one diary's journey through the war. Volunteers also established a real personal bond with the diarist, and they're wonderful to talk to because they delve into that person's life and do a lot of additional research around them as well. So the great benefit of this tool is it's brought together these diary volumes. So whereas before you would only have to dip into one volume and read the transcript of that one volume, now we've got a whole corpus of the whole collection together into one integrated digital archive. And we've also had a lot of end users access this diary collection throughout the centenary of World War I. We've had documentary filmmakers, we've had people like Who Do You Think You Are coming and filming. We've even collaborated with the Australian Theatre for Young People. A script has been written, a theatre script has been written based on a lot of the text from the war diaries. And that play called A Town Called War Boy was performed in Sydney during 2015, and it's now touring nationally in 2018. So we've finally, this year, which is nice, 2018, marking the centenary of the end of World War I, we've finally QA'd this entire body of work, and it's now fully completed and available now online for users to access and search. There's been other manuscript collections that have been added to this tool over time, including a collection of Indigenous Australian language lists. Some of these items are the only known surviving records of language, and this content was curated and managed by the library's Indigenous Services team. So the tool has moved from prototype to business as usual. As I've mentioned, volunteers have provided ongoing feedback about the usability and the functions of the tool. Just this last week, it's been upgraded with new design features. There's ability to navigate through a set of pages within a document. There's a global status change. There's the ability to search across the draft transcriptions. Transcribers have their own dashboard. That's an example, a screenshot of what it basically looks like, the digitised page on one side of the screen and then the text box on the other. So you have your own dashboard so you can see exactly the work that you've done each time you've logged in. And there's also now ability for volunteers to add information in a review notes section and making that review notes section actually searchable for the end user as well. So the other major collection that has gone into the transcription tool recently is a collection of correspondence relating to Sir Joseph Banks, which covers a 30-year period relating to the European discovery and settlement of Australia. A very significant collection. It's correspondence not just by him, but people writing to him, all about, the settlement of New South Wales and the natural history work being carried out by particularly Europeans in that time period. There's around 9,000 pages of this in this collection. They've all been digitised now, But the collection consists mainly of brief letters, sometimes 1 to 2 pages in length, which means that the bank's collection is an ideal one for transcribers to dip in and out of transcribing a brief letter to build up familiarity with the collection and feel as though they've contributed meaningfully to the project. Whilst there was some take-up with the library's on-site volunteers, the papers really needed to be transcribed and accessible within a time frame. And so at the end of 2016, the library hosted a Banks Transcribathon. This event was promoted via our social media channels and also through traditional media outlets in the week prior. And the event combined a traditional curated public program. We brought out original items from our collection, original material written by banks, pictorial works by banks, relating to banks, and we had curated talks, as well as encouraging people to actually log into the tool on site and to participate in the transcription. We really had no idea of what it was going to be like. We were sort of negatively thinking that there might be 5 people that turn up on, it was a Saturday morning at 9 o'clock. However, when we opened the doors, there were lots of people ready and eager to come in. The day proved to be very successful, particularly amongst banks enthusiasts, 18th century history enthusiasts who had the opportunity to look at these original examples of handwritten documents and artworks and to assist the library in doing this work. The first Curator talk was based around deciphering 18th century handwriting, and then people were encouraged to delve in and start working. So there were PCs available, but people brought their own devices with them. We had around 100 people who attended the day, which surpassed our expectations completely, and there were around 500 pages of correspondence that were transcribed. Prizes were given at the end of the day, and people also joined up together. There was a real camaraderie in the room. People collaborated together, working out, brainstorming what words could mean, deciphering the work together. So this may have been, I think, a first for Australian libraries to have this kind of transcribathon. I think the Bodleian Library at Oxford have been doing some in recent past, as well as the Folger Library as well. So just a bit of stats about where we've got. We did a second transcribathon with some university students in Sydney. They were a very different demographic age-wise to the first transcribathon. However, once they got beyond the incredibly complex handwriting, they too really got into the process. So we've been able to really get our numbers up for a 9,000 word, a 9,000 page digitised collection. We've almost got 5,000 pages completed, almost 2,000 have been accepted and published. We've still got a way to go, but we have people logging in from all over the world. We have people who are logging in from the UK in particular, who are transcribing this work for us. So we've been able to really harness the enthusiasms of the community and to allow them to delve into some of our most precious collections. Some of the other, that we've also developed a big Sir Joseph Banks research page where people can find out more about the whole collection and delve deep into it. We've also worked with our oral history collections. We have a project called Amplify, which you may have heard about. One of my colleagues, Jenna Bain, is giving a talk about Amplify across in another session at the moment. Amplify is we are harnessing people to actually transcribe transcriptions from oral history recordings. We launched this with a collection of ours, the Rainbow Archive, which was 75 hours of audio interviews with people from Nimbin in northern New South Wales. And the great thing about this is, again, we had this great community all ready to go who are really interested in the collection. We launched it on the main street of Nimbin, along with the Richmond Tweed Regional Library, and some of the people who were in the original oral history interviews from the 1990s were actually there at the launch, and they helped transcribe their own interviews. So this has been like one of the most successful oral history transcription collaborations because we were able to build up momentum in that specific community. We've also launched other oral history recordings on Amplify, particularly around anniversaries such as the 85th anniversary of the Sydney Harbour Bridge last year. We've put our Bridge Builders oral history recordings, which are obviously recordings made with men who built the bridge. And then at the 50th anniversary of the 67 referendum, we released an interview with Faith Bandler. And this collection has been the one that's been finished completely and is available to search. So this year we are continuing on to add to Amplify. We're doing some work with public libraries across New South Wales who are keen to also load their own oral history collections onto Amplify and get their own communities in their own local areas to collaborate and transcribe. Just really quickly, we've also been geo-referencing our maps like many other people, digitising maps and doing historical overlays of historical maps on modern maps. We did a couple of releases of maps in Sydney and have had, again, very successful results in sort of 700 maps of Sydney's subdivision or real estate maps, which were geo-referenced within 2 weeks. So we had a really good response. They were particularly promoted through public programs, particularly through our Sydney Maps group, which is obviously a group of Sydney map buffs who basically got all of those maps geo-referenced within 2 weeks. So the next stages, just in wrapping up, the content created by our volunteers remains stored in these individual crowdsourced platforms. This content can be accessed by researchers and library staff. However, it's our intention to complete the workflow and ensure the entire corpus of data is integrated and discoverable via the suite of integrated library management systems. Over the past 12 months, the State Library has migrated to a new set of applications using Primo as a discovery layer over Alma and AdLib collection management systems. And the library is working towards the ingestion of this content and providing discoverability through Primo to all the content linked through catalogue records. So in conclusion, from the State Library's experiences, the most successful crowdsourced projects rely on harnessing volunteers' own passions and commitments to the task and to the collection. By targeting specific communities of volunteers and matching their interests to the collection, results can be delivered quickly and successfully. These projects are an opportunity to engage more deeply with unique cultural heritage collections and provide volunteers from around the world opportunities to access uniquely significant collections that were once just the domain of academic elites. If cultural heritage institutions continue to share interesting collections that can be paired with an engaged community of digital volunteers, crowdsourcing will remain a viable tool for discoverability, audience engagement, and adding value to our heritage collections. Thank you.
Elise, I might start with the first question. You've got a lot of projects there and they sound absolutely amazing. Have you noticed that you are getting a particular demographic that likes to get involved in these sorts of projects?
Well, I think that demographic is changing. So our library volunteers who would come on site, and they still do come on site and work at their volunteer PCs, often on this tool, they are of an older demographic. They're obviously retired people who are really interested in the collections that we have. And it's a very much traditional volunteer program that many GLAMs run. I think through some of this experience, in particularly doing the transcribathons, we were able to draw out people of different demographics. The first transcribathon with the Banks material, we certainly made an assumption that they would be older people, particularly people quite happy deciphering handwriting from the 18th and 19th century. However, while they might have been the majority, there were younger people, and particularly the work that we did with the University of Sydney, that was part of a conference for Australian and New Zealand uni students, proved to us that there is real interest from many age groups. So on the top of our leaderboard, there are people who are of a different demographic to what we usually have.
Hi, Elise, that was wonderful. I was wondering if you've had any collaborations with the Australian Museum and Atlas of Living Australia's Digivol transcription portal, and whether you looked at that, found it not to suit your needs, or whether you took anything from that, or whether you've actually been able to help them develop it further.
No, so it was originally sort of designed and built around 2012, 2013. So, and I wasn't directly, it was mostly our web team who looked around and who started devising and building. I think we certainly looked at examples that were out there, for example, the US model. But I think that certainly the opportunity is to look at how other institutions are, what they're doing and how we can adapt and, you know, use good user cases. Yeah. So no, I haven't directly looked at it. Yeah.
Good morning. Good morning. Perhaps just a more practical thing is, do you have a principle of editing, or when people transcribe, is it going directly online or is it being inspected prior to?
Yeah, so we do have levels. We do have a guide. So with each collection, there's a bit of a spiel at the beginning about what to do, what not to do, you know, write exactly what's there, even if it's crossed out. You know, there's general guidelines about that. Write what you see and then put in square brackets the right spelling. If it's, you know, particularly with Banks material, 18th century language is often, the spelling is very different. And then there's layers of QA, yes. So the first person who's transcribing it directly from the page will see exactly what's there. They will then mark it as being done or completed, but it's not yet live. So that's when we actually have, we bring in and bring along our traditional library volunteers who have been around the library a long time and who are familiar with the collection to actually do that final checking. And they have the rights to actually be able to, you know, change words and so forth, and then they will mark it as completed. Yep. Yep.
Hi, thank you, Elise. That was such a wonderful presentation. I'm so jealous of your role. I just wanted to know if there's any, if the material can be translated into other languages. And the second part I wanted to ask is, does the library offer grants to artists to create artworks or other works from those wonderful collections?
So the first part of your question, translated into other languages, no. And I guess that's something we can think about for other rounds of enhancements. No, so it is all, you know, obviously it's going to be in English apart from the Aboriginal languages, the word lists. So no, I haven't thought about that. That's something to think about for the future. The second part about artists, we certainly have begun a Artists in Residence program. We've had artist John Bacour, who's a Sydney artist, come into the building, and we've commissioned his works, and we've had a second artist who's working at the moment on site. So we certainly do work, and there's other artists. I'm working with an artist who's located on the south coast of New South Wales, who's particularly inspired by 18th century, 19th century, early natural history drawings. So there's a huge amount of scope, and that is obviously one of the outcomes of mass digitisation, is the ability for any person, artists or scientists or whoever, to access this digitised collection and do whatever they feel that they would like to do. So yeah, it's ripe with opportunity, this sort of material.
Could you talk about, do you analyse the volunteers' experience, what they like, what they don't like, why they return, what they don't return?
Yes. So we certainly do. There's, well, again, the traditional volunteer program at the library. We have the volunteer coordinator, who is that link between the institution and the group of volunteers, and that's a very much a formalised program, probably very similar to other large organisations who have volunteer programs. They have committee meetings, and they produce their own little journal, and you know, it's quite a formal feedback process. We also have a staff person in our library, a couple of staff in our library division, our cataloguers and our digitisation area, who are kind of links as well. So if there's issues with logging on or issues about transcription or specific questions, there's always that link on the floor. And So it just depends. Some people's nature is they just are happy to go off and transcribe. It's like the Trove experience, you know. Some people don't really make themselves known to us formally, but they just love logging in, particularly obviously people in the UK. They'll only contact, you know, me if there's a problem. You know, I tried to log in this morning, I couldn't, what's the problem? Or blah, 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 I couldn't find something. So sometimes some of those people who are remote, you just hear from them when there's a technical issue or something like that. So, yeah, I guess it's just dependent on people. Some people are more vocal and more passionate, and other people are just happy to just get on and do it.